Bone Necklace, a member of the Oglala Lakota Chiefs Council, was portrayed in 1899 when the Lakota were living under the United States reservation system. Responsible for mediating negotiations with federal agents, he defended his people's interests during a time of political and cultural transition. The portrait is a hand-colored platinum print. The image highlights his braided hairstyle, the bone necklace that gives him his name, and other ceremonial items of Oglala clothing. Wolf Robe, or Honahevatumahi, was born around 1838 in what is now Oklahoma. A chief of the Southern Cheyenne, he served as a mediator in negotiations carried out by the Cherokee Commission, and in 1890 received the Peace Medal from President Benjamin Harrison in recognition of his role. Eagle Arrow, a member of the Siksika Nation, a branch of the Blackfoot established in what is now Montana, lived at the turn of the 20th century, when the community was already confined to reservations and subjected to the U.S. government's assimilation policy. In that context, the Siksika preserved buffalo hunting rituals that had turned into ceremonial celebrations, continued to pass on knowledge through elders' councils, and began incorporating farming tools and missionary schools. Little Wound, Thiope Chikala, who assumed leadership of the Quinyan Band of the Oglala Lakota after 1865, was photographed in 1899 alongside his wife and son by the Haines Studio. The portrait, taken on the Pine Ridge Reservation, preserves visual details from the post-war period. Wool blankets distributed by the agency appear alongside shell necklaces and eagle feathers, combining outside elements with traditional practices. Produced in 1906, the photograph shows Strong Left Hand, a representative of the Northern Cheyenne, with his wife and children in front of their family shelter on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. The negative is credited to photographer Julia E. Toole, who was then a teacher and documentarian at the reservation school. The scene captures a routine moment that, nevertheless, reveals Cheyenne domestic organization and the conditions shaped by reservation policies in the early 20th century. Entitled Minnehaha, the image was produced in 1904 by the Detroit Photographic Company, which promoted tourist views using the photochrome process, patented in the 1880s to transform black and white negatives into color prints. The subject shows the namesake waterfall, known from the poem The Song of Hiawatha. Around 1898, New York photographer Gertrude Casimir portrayed Amos Two Bulls, a member of the Sioux Lakota people, as part of a private series she began after seeing, on her way to Madison Square Garden, the promotional parade for Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. To build the collection, Casimir invited several indigenous artists to her studio on Fifth Avenue. Taken in 1905 in the Taos Pueblo, then in the New Mexico Territory, the image shows a Pueblo healer while treating a sick person in front of his adobe home. The shot by Carl Moon is part of an ethnographic series he produced to document native therapeutic methods and preserve, amid American expansion healing practices transmitted orally by the community. Charles American Horse, born in 1901 on the Pine Ridge Reservation, was part of the Oglala Lakota Nation as the son of Chief American Horse, a diplomat who represented his people in Washington and advocated for indigenous education. This family connection placed him among the Wagluhe leadership circles, responsible for negotiating with the federal agency. Acoma Pueblo, an indigenous settlement built on a mesa about 60 miles west of Albuquerque, New Mexico, has seen continuous occupation beginning around 1100 AD. In the early 20th century, archaeologists already considered it one of the oldest communities in North America, citing evidence of pottery and adobe constructions. The photograph depicts a member of the Crow Nation, recorded by Richard Throssell around 1907, when he was already living on the Crow Reservation and creating a visual inventory of indigenous routines and ceremonies. His collection includes views of camps, teepees, and burial structures, everyday scenes along the banks of the Little Bighorn, as well as documentation of dances and gatherings that brought together the Crow, Northern Cheyenne and Sioux. The Thunder Tipi was a ceremonial lodge belonging to Brings Down the Sun, a prominent figure among the Blackfoot. Set up on the plains north of the Rocky Mountains around 1905, the camp that housed it served as the setting for political councils, healing rituals, and sharing of the annual hunt. The canvas displayed lightning, cloud, and buffalo track motifs, icons that recorded origin myths and agreements between clans. This is a manually printed image made from a Roland W. Reed negative in the early decades of the 20th century. The composition shows 5 indigenous riders, likely from Plains nations, riding single file down a grassy slope in what would become the state of Montana, captured at the exact moment of their descent. In 1912, on the banks of a river in what is now Montana, men from the Piegan Band, part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, were photographed while carrying out a ritual dedicated to the Thunderbird, an entity associated with storms and cosmic balance in their cosmology. The location, chosen for its proximity to water and traditional camping sites, reinforced the ceremony's sacred dimension. Arrowmaker, a member of the Ojibwe Nation, posed in 1903 for a portrait later reproduced through the photochrome process. The Detroit Photographic Company, then known for releasing colored postcards, prepared the chromolithographic matrix and circulated the scene among collectors and tourists interested in ethnographic images of North American indigenous peoples at the start of the 20th century. The photograph shows a member of the Northern Plains peoples, captured from a rocky outcrop that provides a clear view of the valley below. Taken in Montana in the early 20th century, the image is part of a series of staged scenes by Roland W. Reed, a photographer associated with the pictorialist movement. The original black and white print was hand-colored, a process then used to bring the copies closer to natural colors. The photograph, entitled Song-Like, taken in 1899, portrays a member of the Pueblo people. The negative was produced by F.A. Reinhardt, who, with Adolph F. Muir, organized a portfolio of portraits of the indigenous delegations invited to the Trans-Mississippi Exposition, held in Omaha, Nebraska the previous year. The series was commissioned as the event's official record. The photograph shows Geronimo Goyale, born around 1829 and at the time held in custody by the U.S. Army, a war chief of the Chiricahua Apache. The portrait was taken in 1898 by F.A. Reinhardt, who documented the indigenous delegations invited to the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition in Omaha, Nebraska. Around 1905, federal observers recorded a Blackfeet camp set up on the northern plains of Montana, near the Marias River. Families arranged their teepees, leather covers stretched over pine poles, in an order that reflected clan hierarchy. Near the central fires, travois and harnesses remained ready for seasonal moves and hunts. Reproduced using a traditional early 20th century printing method, the photograph shows a young woman by a riverbank, captured in a moment of everyday quiet. The image is attributed to Roland W. Reed, whose work was linked to the pictorialist movement, illustrating the techniques and aesthetic values of that historical period. Entitled In Summer, the photograph F.A. Reinhardt took in 1898 is part of the portrait series produced for the Trans-Mississippi and International Exposition in Omaha, designed to create a visual inventory of indigenous nations. The subject is a member of the Kiowa, a southern plains people who were already under federal reservation restrictions by that time. The daughter of a Blackfeet family living on the northern plains of Montana, this young woman lived through the first decade of the 20th century, when federal policies expanded the reservation system and boarding schools aimed at assimilating indigenous children. During that same period, the near extinction of the buffalo, the construction of railroads, and the opening of new farms forced the Blackfeet to rethink hunting patterns, forms of government, and how they used their territory. At the turn of the 20th century, Piegan Blackfeet communities occupied the northern plains of Montana, an area defined by the 1855 Fort Benton Treaty, which created the tribal reservation. The Piegan were one of 4 groups of the Blackfoot Confederacy, an alliance of Algonquian peoples who maintained military coordination and ceremonial exchange. Their presence in Montana dates back to the 17th century, when Blackfoot clans moved southwest, pressured by the intensification of the fur trade at British posts near the Great Lakes. In the early 20th century, the Blackfeet lived on the reservation established by the 1888 treaty, still occupying the northern prairies of Montana. During winter, the plains were covered in bright snow, limiting hunting and forcing families to stay near more sheltered camps. Subsistence combined small herds, federal rations, and seasonal trade, while ceremonies like the sun dance preserved the group's political and spiritual structure. At the dawn of the 20th century, a Blackfoot couple lived in northern Montana, a territory federally designated only a few years earlier. Their everyday subsistence was tied to an economy that continued after the decline of the great buffalo herds. They hunted deer and elk, fished in the tributaries of the Milk River, and gathered camas roots and other medicinal plants according to the seasonal calendar.